Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for the Teen Anxiety Maze. Now, I've said this before so many times, but I just wanted to remind everybody that listens to this podcast, whether you're a young person, a parent, an educator, or just a friendly neighbor that cares about kids, I want this podcast to let you know all of the adults, all the people. I've had some teenagers on the program too, all the people in the world that can help you with all sorts of things. Because we get into these situations in our lives and we wonder what am I supposed to do with this? And I promise that you can almost always find somebody who knows about it and that can help you with it. So today we have Amy Shaw with us as a guest, and she did not expect to become a life concierge, but after years of living abroad, having 10 children, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, four biological and six adopted, Amy and her husband got the news. He had a terminal illness. Rather than bemoan a diagnosis, Amy and Brian chose to celebrate his life. This is what inspired her Walk the Red program, which equips the diagnosed and their caregivers with a powerful protocol to help them end well, help their life end well. Amy says, "We're all on the red carpet." And that really spoke to me when you think about this. We all get to decide how we live and how we die. In addition to being a John Maxwell certified speaker, Amy is a modern impressionist artist who often combines her artistic abilities with her keynotes and workshops, which sounds really awesome too. So, Amy, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, you bet. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Well, this topic, we've talked about grief in some other ways, but I think the way that you are approaching it and how you're helping people is different than what we have talked about before. But first, I want to know, how did you and your husband come to have 10 children?
Well, it was not overnight. We started the traditional way. We had biological children, and we had a dream of having a lot of kids. And in the course of having children, we lost babies as well. In fact, we lost three, and it took us 9 years to get to four children. And so our dream of a large family, and that is large in many people's scopes,
Hmm.
but we wanted more than that. We wanted six. That was our target. And by the time I had our fourth child, we had been through so much loss that I knew that I couldn't do it again. I knew I couldn't carry another baby. Our most significant loss was a loss in the final week of pregnancy, and everything was going along great. And 39 weeks, there was no movement. And I went into the emergency room, and they came in, did the ultrasound, shut the machine off, and the nurse walked out. And I was like, "What?" And yeah, they came back in and said, "We're so sorry." I was like, "No, turn that back on."
Yes. Oh my
Um,
gosh.
so yeah, I delivered a beautiful, perfect baby who was just not living. And so
Mm-hmm.
that loss really, really impacted our family. And as a mom, just devastating.
Hmm.
So I knew that. So then I had one more baby after that, and that was so full of anxiety. I was so afraid it was going to happen again. It did not. But in that process, we made some decisions that we believed that we had to go through the pain of that, so we didn't want to waste that pain. So
Hmm.
we really tried to, learn all we could through that process. I didn't want to become bitter. I know
Hmm.
that hardships can, kind of either harden people and they become really
Hmm.
bitter and grumpy and stagnant, or they kind of soften and become pliable and they grow. And that was the way that we wanted to be. And so actually it was after our final child was born that my husband, he was listening to a podcast and he
Hmm.
heard about the need of families for orphans internationally, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa because of the
Mm.
AIDS crisis. And so he called me from work one day and said, "Would you ever consider international adoption?" I was like, And I had been thinking I really wanted to grow our family more, but I knew that I couldn't do it again. So this
Mhm.
was just a really neat way. So we proceeded then to bring home our first adopted child from Uganda. And then we started almost serial adopting from China, where
Mhm.
we brought home five more orphans in 4 years. So
Wow.
we ballooned from 4 to 10 children. Yeah, 2009, our final daughter was born, and then we brought home our final two children in 2016. So
Oh,
how
wow.
we got to 10.
Mm. Well, you mentioned in the bio it said that you had lived abroad too. So were part of these at any time when you were living abroad too, and that was just part of what you were doing there, or this was after that?
Yeah, it really was after that. We had never even considered adoption before that, actually. But, we have always just loved kids. My husband and I were just very silly people, just
Mhm.
loving to have fun. And so we always enjoyed kids. And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me looking back, but yeah, we had a date early on and we went to an art festival, and all the things that I was drawn to, he was also drawn to, and the commonality was interesting because they were all photography, which we ended up having a portrait photography business for a while. And they were portraits of children internationally, and that was what repeatedly from booth to booth that we were both lingering over. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a little foreshadowing.
Yes. Oh, that's so cool. I love that.
Mhm.
Now, when he was diagnosed with this terminal cancer,
Yeah.
how old were these 10 kids at that time?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I had to write them out because I had to think about it. So my oldest was 18, then 16, 15, 12, 9, 8, 7, 5, 5, and 3.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it was, I mean, there's never an easy time to receive a diagnosis like that.
No,
My husband was
no.
43, and we were just getting going. We had just built
Yes.
a family. We had brought our last girls home and at the end of 2016, and this was March of 2018. So not
Mm.
much time had really passed that we were kind of doing this large family thing. It was very chaotic and very colorful and very full of animals and
Oh my gosh. I can't. Well, and so you're dealing with, how you're feeling about this diagnosis. Your husband's dealing with how he's going to deal and feel about the diagnosis. And then you have to deal with how all the kids feel about the
yeah.
diagnosis, which was probably different for every one of them.
And uniquely so because not only, they all have their own personalities, but these children have come from different backgrounds, especially the
Mhm.
six that we brought in. And this was a pending loss again for them. They had
Mhm.
already lost their first families, and
Mm.
they had already lost their first cultures, their first languages.
Mm.
And so it was a lot. It's really interesting. We had a family dog that we loved so much. And in 2017, she was killed on the road, actually. And the devastation, it was just so telling to me. So my husband was at work and I called him. It was early in the morning. It was before the kids went to school. And so the horror of this dog, I guess we had lost my father-in-law. So the kids had lost a
Mm.
grandfather, and that was really the only loss that they had experienced. And that was very, very hard. But having this dog that they saw every day and loved on every day just suddenly cut off like that. My four
Mhm.
biological children went into like dramatic, dramatic emotional meltdowns.
Mhm.
My one son was very angry, where the other kids were just crying and screaming and no, no, no. And it was so interesting to me because I was emotional about it too. And I was calling my
Mhm.
husband on the phone. All of my adopted children just kind of stood there. They were disengaged and they showed no emotion. And they were more
Mm.
like observers on
Mhm.
the scene.
Mhm.
And that was so interesting to watch because, we're collecting all these experiences, from everything
Mhm.
that we've gone through. And it was so telling and heartrending to watch,
Mhm. Mhm.
how their emotions had really they'd been battered around already.
Yeah,
And
they
so
already knew how to
loss,
shut their feelings down. Mhm.
yes, coping
Mhm.
skills were already in place,
Yeah.
even in some of these little ones, because,
Yep.
my littlest one would have been 2 then.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, it was really interesting. So,
Mm. You've experienced a lot of different types of death too when you're talking about,
yeah.
a beloved family pet and the baby that was lost and the other babies that were lost as well. And sometimes it just seems like that's just too much for somebody to handle. Do you ever think about that, or do you have ways? Because I'm sure a lot of people get kind of caught up in that, like, why is this happening to me? And, what am I supposed to do with all this? And
That's a really good question. I think, the very first loss that we had was I was pregnant with twins, which was a dream of mine since I was a little
Mhm.
girl. And only one of the twins died, actually. And
Mhm.
so I continued to be pregnant and I delivered my daughter on their due date. And so it looked as if everything was fine, but I was grieving heavily on the inside.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and my hairdresser had put me in contact with someone who had that identical situation. And I had a phone call with her. And when I got off the phone, I think I probably said it out loud, I'm not going to do that because it had been 2 years. Her then Singleton, I should say, was 2 years old, and she was the most bitter, angry person. And that devastating loss defined her. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking, I don't want this to define me. And so I think every loss that we had, and then we lost a baby while we were living in East Asia, an early pregnancy. And then we lost our full term with live babies in between there. But I think that those losses kind of ramped up, and I learned things that I was like, okay, I'm not going to become bitter. I'm not going to waste the pain. I'm not going to, so it's almost like I'm collecting the cards for like different types of losses. My father died as well after my husband died. And that, so my husband had a terminal diagnosis and we knew it. My dad was like suddenly sick. He was fine. And then he was suddenly sick and he lived just a couple of days in the hospital. And then all of a sudden his life was over. And so,
Mm.
and then my father-in-law, he had early onset dementia. And so it was this long
Mm.
slide and just this loss of function and
Mhm.
understanding and for over 5-6 years, and that was also horribly painful. So
Yeah, I
I've had
know.
a lot of those, but I think I also have learned that I don't ask the question why, because I know that I can't comprehend the answer. And
Yes.
that has been really helpful for me to
Mhm.
understand, like, my human brain is too finite, that
Mhm.
I believe in a creator God. I believe that he is orchestrating things. And yes, a lot of pain has come,
Mhm.
but I believe that I can't demand an answer. And then, I mean, I'm free to demand the answer, but I don't
Mhm.
think that I could comprehend the answer. So I've actually taken a different approach so that when I do want to ask why, because it's not that I don't want to ask why. I ask I ask God, what do you want me to know right now?
Mm.
Because that is an answer that my brain can, like, that's like
Sure.
give it to me in a little piece, God. Can
Mhm.
just a
Right.
little download for what I can handle right now and what I need to know right now. And that
Mhm.
I have found that to be just really helpful,
Yeah.
and that helps me move forward. And I
Yeah.
I get an answer and I can do something with that little tiny bit.
Sure.
Whereas
That
the
makes
answer
sense.
why is,
Well, one of the things you'd said to me before we got started recording is that when all this happened, you were like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And then you look for the answers, and there are no answers. Like, there is no playbook, like you said, about what to do when someone has a terminal illness or when something like this happens in your family. And so, part of what you have done now is tried to create a playbook or a program or ways for people to navigate this. So tell us about what that's called and what is it all about?
yeah, sure. So I just yesterday, my
Mm.
book came out, so I'm really
Mm.
excited that that's now out there in the world, and I'm just really praying that this can be a help to people that are in that situation like I was. Like, what? What? We spent so much time just like being so shocked because my
Yeah.
husband was super healthy. And believe it or
Mm.
not, like getting brain cancer was the thing he worried about the most. Like
Oh my gosh.
he was kind of a closet hypochondriac. I mean, nobody would ever know that about him. But if he had a little twinge, he'd be like, "Oh no, I'm probably dying of cancer." He wouldn't tell anybody. But that was like his internal struggle and dialogue. And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that he did was, and I didn't even know this until later, but he found out that if you eat anchovies, that it fights brain cancer. It'll prevent
Mm.
you from having brain cancer. So he would buy anchovies and take them to work and eat them there so that I didn't have to smell them.
Oh my
But it was
goodness.
so interesting that the Lord allowed him to have the number one thing he was afraid of. God allowed that to happen in his life. And so he had even articulated to himself, my biggest fear is that I'm going to have a headache and it's going to be brain cancer. And
Mm.
pretty much that's what happened.
Oh
And so
wow.
we spent so much of our time trying to be like, how is this possible? My husband was an avid exerciser. He liked his cookies, but he
Hmm.
ate healthy.
Yeah.
And we were just an active family. And so how could this happen? And I think, that desire for somebody to show me the way was just like you had said on another episode, when I want to go somewhere, I use my GPS and I put here, I want to go here, and then it maps it out for you. And
Hmm.
you've never maybe traveled that road, but that's okay because you have a path and you
Hmm.
have you have this little, Siri voice or whatever telling you, okay, turn left here, turn right here. And so that's really what I sought to do with this book. My book is it's very short. It's very succinct because I didn't want to go on and on and on.
Hmm.
But I wanted to help people know, number one, you can do this.
Hmm.
I can do this. You can do this. And I wanted to help them shortcut some of those learning curves that I had. Like, I didn't know squat about hospice. I didn't.
Hmm.
I honestly thought that hospice, when people say we're going to call a hospice in, I thought that that was like a phone number that you just like
Oh.
911 or
Hmm.
411, that there was maybe a little three number, thing that you would call and in comes hospice. And I had no idea that there are like hospice companies and you have to choose one. And the word hospice is more like bank. And, if you,
Hmm.
bank, there's millions of banks and then there's
Right.
millions of types of accounts and choices. And that was so overwhelming to me in the moment.
Mm.
So just a bunch of things like that, understanding clinical trials. I mean, when your headspace isn't there and all of a sudden doctors are telling you this stuff and they are well versed in this, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not. So that's really why I wrote this guide for people to just say, hey, this is what this means, this is what this means. And then also to kind of inspire people for like how do you deal with the emotion of it all, the overwhelm, and then make that decision to not become hard and bitter, but
Mm-hmm.
become soft and pliable and allow this to grow you, in spite of what you may fear, this just might be the doorway to something amazing in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your purpose may emerge through it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, how do I live the time that I have with my beloved person? This might
Mm-hmm.
be a mom, this might be, a dear friend, who knows? But that might be a child, might be a child.
Mm-hmm.
I have several adoptive friends who have gone through the loss of their children. How do we live that time well? How do I help my person really leave a meaningful legacy? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of what my work is. And so so that's the book, Navigating Goodbye. And it's a guide for those blindsided by terminal illness.
Mm.
And then the program that I've created is one-on-one coaching with clients to help them kind of like customize all of that information and in a, in time, as they're moving through it, have me there to help them. And then I've also created an actual 12 module program that they also can use. So
Oh, wow. That
variety
is
of things.
amazing. Yes. Well, I'm picturing like I'm when you're talking about the book, even if someone isn't experiencing in their own immediate family somebody with a terminal diagnosis, I feel like I would always know someone who had just gotten that diagnosis, or, like someone at my church or somebody, my neighbor or whatever. And I feel like this could be a gift that you could
Yeah.
give people that, because so many times when someone has gotten this diagnosis, it's like, all the rest of us are thinking the same thing, like, well, what do I talk about? Or how do I
Yes.
comfort them? Or how do I help them? Or, what do I do? And so this might be a way to feel like you're doing something and it would be very helpful to them. And
Mm.
yet, it's easy to do. It's something you could just hand them or send
Yeah.
them if you needed to. And so I think that would be so great. And it would be, I mean, I can imagine how you would just want to have some guide, some
Yeah.
what do I do next? And when your brain is just so
So overwhelmed
overwhelmed by things, you
and
do
exhausted.
need like steps, like just
Yeah.
do this and just do
Yeah.
this. And this is what this means. So I love that. And so I'm going to put the links to all these things in the show notes so people can click on them and go to them, buy them, whatever. But your program, there's like two pieces to it, it sounds like. So there's something that they could sort of self guide through
Correct.
and
Yeah.
then if they want the added one-to-one coaching support through that process, then they could do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted
Okay.
to go back to something you were saying.
Sure.
I added a very important chapter in that book for an acquaintance of somebody because
Mm.
just like you said, like maybe you know a neighbor and you think I want to do something, but I don't know
Mhm.
what. So I actually have
Mhm.
a chapter in there. So maybe you buy the book, you read this chapter, and then you hand it off. But I wrote it both from because I've been that person.
Yeah.
Before this happened to me, I mean, there was a woman in my church who her husband was sick for a while and then he actually died. And I was like,
Mm.
what? It was
Yeah.
just like, what? It's so appalled me. And I really was frozen. Like I wanted to do something. I felt terrible,
Mhm.
just didn't know exactly. And so I wrote a little bit from that perspective. And then I'm
Mhm.
like, here's some, I'm going to give you some really practical things to do. And I'm also going to tell you, here's what you don't do. And,
Right.
and that I think can just be super helpful for people.
Yes. Yes. So many times I want people to just say, tell me what to do or not to do. Like, I'll do any of it. I just need someone to tell me what that
Yeah.
is. So I love that. Now, was there anything different that the teenagers in your family needed during that time that was different through the grieving process, that was different than like the littles that were in your family?
I would say that that's a great question. What did they need? I don't know that what they needed is really what they chose to receive.
Sure.
Kids, especially teenagers, a lot of them are like, leave me alone. I don't want to do this,
Mhm.
or I just want to hang out with my friends. Or we did some family counseling after my husband
Mm.
was diagnosed. Our church
Mhm.
was very, very kind and extending this. And then I had some of the boys go together. We did one-on-one for some of my teen girls. The littles, they really didn't know how to do that kind of a session. So, we had that available to them. Not all of my teens wanted to do that, and I didn't
Mhm.
force them to do that.
Sure.
But as a family culture, we talked about death often. We talked
Mhm.
about death and life, and we have this perspective that that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And
Yes.
so we're wearing a body, and that body, I love to say that our bodies are our currency. It's our
Mhm.
it's our currency to buy up the spiritual opportunities in the world. And once your
Mhm.
currency runs out, your opportunities to impact the world are out
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
And so, in that sense, like caring for your body is really, really important. Good health, good exercise, all that's really important. But when someone is seriously ill or terminally ill, that it's not just the end of the life and everything's shut down, but we had a lot of conversations around the fact that death is really just a doorway, and it's
Mhm.
it's a changing doorway where we go through it, and we've been living this life on planet Earth in our bodies, and then we go through this door, and now we're continuing on in an existence still as who we are, but our
Mhm.
bodies are not there. And as a believer in Jesus, I believe that my body is going to be resurrected in the final days. And so that, understanding that my life is going to extend, that really, really helped when we thought about like helping my husband approach death. And so
Mm.
we as a family did not cling to him and whine and like, how are we going to do it without you? I really rallied my kids and said, okay, and this was a conversation without my husband there. And I said, listen, we've got to cheer him on. Daddy has loved Jesus since he was, I think, 5. And so
Mhm.
this is what he has been hoping for his whole life, is
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
eternity in heaven. So
Mhm.
he is actually about to lay hold of that. And so we want to help him get excited. We don't
Mhm.
want to just be like, well, how are we going to do it without you? Now, it's not that we
Mhm.
didn't feel that way. We absolutely
Sure.
did.
Sure.
Um, but let's rally around him. And I had, because I had been through all of those other losses and hardships, I knew that God was going to hold me together. I did
Mhm.
not know how, but I
Mhm.
was willing to bank on it that he was.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
with that authority, maybe, or faith, I was able to tell my husband, hey, we're going to make it. We're going to be okay. I never, long, long ago, I never wanted to be the person who died of a broken heart. Now, we had a marriage that I would have died of a broken heart if I had not intended that, because we loved one another so desperately much.
Mm.
We loved being together, but I communicated that to the kids, and the kids really rallied around that as well. And like,
Mm.
okay, we're going to cheer them on. We spent a lot of time talking about who are you going to see in heaven,
Mhm.
dreaming about, wow, you're going to be able to fly, those kinds
Yeah.
of things.
Mhm.
And that really did kind of shift the mood. And it's not that
Mhm.
we didn't cry. And I have said
Sure.
this before, I bet we cried every day. My husband lived 37 months after that. The prediction was like 6 to 12. And so we really got kind of bonus time. There's no way to escape that feeling of like it's hanging over me, this
Yeah.
diagnosis. There is no way around that. And it's so
Mhm.
uncomfortable. But you can choose to not let that dictate your joy. So,
Yes. Oh, I love that so much because my whole podcast has been about, we get to choose every day how we feel or what we do about anything that happens. My tagline at the end used to always be choose wisely. And
yes.
it's so true. Like you can choose to be the victim in the story or you can choose to be the hero. And you were helping him feel like the hero in the
Yeah.
story too. And I love that so much. And I could see how that would feel so much better than
Mhm.
thinking about what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? And not that you didn't also wonder that, but you didn't dwell on that. And I really think that that's where most people's suffering comes from is that dwelling on, the tragedy, the terribleness, the, unfairness. Like when you just think about that all the time, you
Mhm.
can't help but just feel terrible.
Yeah.
And I love that's like the idea of your whole movement is that
Mhm.
we're all waiting for that time when we die, whether it's a terminal illness or an accident, or we just die of old age or, whatever it is, we're all going to get to that end. And
Right.
so why don't we just love and live this life and have a legacy no matter how long that we have?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I love that message. It is exactly how I'm living my life right now, and I hope to continue to
Wonderful.
live life like
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
And I'm just so glad that you reached out to be a guest because this is such a good it's another twist on just what we can do in any challenges, but grief in particular. And I'm just so glad that there are people that you decided your mission is to help people in this process because we need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And I will be sending people your way.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's been an honor. It's been a real joy to meet you and to spend some time together.
Perfect. Thank you.